just come out to Burbage, just nipped out. It's a very, very wet, sort of damp. I don't even know, we don't really have a word for it. We have it so often in Britain. It's sort of, we're up in the clouds basically. It's sort of foggy, it's sort of damp. It's been raining for about 5 days. It's just stopped. Everything's sort of saturated, it's dull. It's heavily overcast. It's not classically what you would call good landscape photography weather, but I'm out here. I'm just going to see if I can find some in the trees, see if the moss has kind of soaked up a bit of the water and it's looking nice and green, because it's February and it's this time of year, everything's pretty brown. You know, the leaves have rotted away, the bracken's down, all the rock's wet, there's not a lot of colour. So, but it is quite flat light, which can be really good for transparency film, because it's a high contrast medium and it's a sort of low contrast light, and it tends to work well. So we'll see what we can find. So I'm just trying to see if something catches my eye in terms of a shape or like a coincidence of lines with the trees and the rock. I'm being quite mindful of colour. There's a lot of green here, so it'd be very easy to shoot something here where everything's green, so tonally there's not a lot of contrast. It's kind of things that, you know, if you shot it in black and white, you can end up with just a sheet of grey. So I'm trying to find some shapes or something that catches my eye. I'm not thinking, you know, I'm not coming out here thinking, oh, rule of thirds or leading lines or golden mean, any of that kind of garbage. I'm just walking around and seeing what, you know, takes my fancy really. I found something that looks a little bit interesting. And this is somewhere I've literally walked like meters from this before, just on a different day, different conditions, never really spotted this. So I'm going to see what I can come up with here. It just shows you, even on like a unpromising day, it's always worth getting out. I always think these conditions, because they're sort of like, most people wouldn't bother coming out. If you can get anything, it's like a win. And if anything else, it's like a training session. It's like, you know, if you can come out on a day like this and get something good, you know, it's good practice basically. So I think I've got a composition here. Because of the light and dark, there's a bit of contrast there, so it's not going to look too flat. There's a few technical things I'm probably going to have to deal with, large format wise. I'll talk you through them in a minute. Right, I found what I think is a decent composition. It's a little bit tight, top and bottom, but if I go backwards, other things kind of fall out of place. It doesn't really work. So I'll give it a try. One of the technical issues I have with these kind of shots, well, normally when you go out at sunrise or sunset, there's two technical issues. One is focusing and getting your plane of focus from the near ground to the far, and the other thing is balancing the exposure between the foreground and the sky with transparency film, because you haven't got much latitude to play with. This is a totally different kind of shot. It's relatively, well, you can't really use a lot of tilt. It's not a foreground background thing, but it's deep but complex, and it's not a flat plane. So this is going to be one where it's going to be crucial to get the focus at the right point and use small aperture to get enough depth of field and to gauge that properly. That's the main technical issue with this. The light levels are not too low, so I know I'll be able to do a long exposure okay for a small aperture, long exposure. There's no wind, should be okay for that. Contrast wise, because it's flat light, probably going to be okay. Probably not going to need, it's not like I'm going to need grad filters to even it, I don't think. I could look at using a polarizer to bring out a bit of the colour. Sometimes when you use a polarizer, it sort of flattens things. Like sometimes the reflections on the specular reflections on vegetation is actually giving a bit of shape, and sometimes you gain colour but you lose a bit of shape definition. So I'll have to see how that goes. So for this one, I've gone with the 240mm lens, which is my sort of long lens. In 35mm terms, it's probably equivalent to like a 70mm, something like that. This is a Fuji one, it's really, really sharp. What I'm gonna have to do though, when I've composed it on the ground glass, I've roughly focused it just by eye, just looking at it, just so that I know I'm roughly in focus when I'm composing. Because sometimes if you focus this so far out when you're composing, if you then focus it correctly, it'll change the magnification, and you lose your composition sometimes. So, but what I need to do now is I need to focus it properly. So I'm going to use a loop on the ground glass under the dark cloth. And I've also got a little depth of field gauge here, so that I know essentially what I'm trying to work out is if I need to put any tilt on, which I probably don't, but maybe a little bit. But whatever I do, I'm going to have a range of focus from, say, there to there, or something like that. And I've got to know that what that equates to in terms of what aperture I need to shoot. So I've got a little gauge there, and it works for every lens. So it takes the guesswork out of it, basically. So what I'm going to need to do is I need to work out what the closest thing to the camera is, or the, if it's tilted, what the front bit of the wedge of focus is, and then the back furthest bit, and work out what the difference between them is, and then focus somewhere in the middle and use the correct aperture. So I'm going to have a go at that now. Okay, so what I've done here is I've used a very, very small amount of tilt on the back, just to align the plane of focus a little bit more with the main sort of thrust of the trees, and then I'm going to use a small aperture for depth of field. I'm actually going to use f/64, I think, which is not as small as the lens will go. It'll go down to 90. So when I'm metering something like this, I'm just really start off by looking at what's the brightest things in shot and having a look on the meter. So the bright bits of the moss and the trees through my spot meter show me about a 7 EV. The dark shadows are going to be well below that, like a 5. And the middle bits of the trees probably somewhere around a 6. Yeah. So what that tells me is I've got to make an exposure. The highest bits of the trees are going to have to be about +1. So 7, so the exposure is going to be about 6. The midtones are going to be like that, and the shadows are going to fall wherever they will. That's fine. Middle exposure is 6. I'm going to look around and see what f/64. I'm at 2 minutes, and because I'm shooting Velvia, that's probably, I'm going to look at my long exposure correction. That's probably going to be 4 minutes. This is one of those points where I need to do a bit of a sanity check. Because if I'm about to do a 4-minute exposure and it's like dusk and it's getting dark, and by the time it gets those 4 minutes up, it's probably got darker still, so I'd need even longer. So I know it's not going to work. Obviously, if I was out on a really windy day, 4 minutes of exposure, if the trees are moving, that might work well, it might not work. Camera might be getting blown around. Need to have a think about that. Today, I think this is going to be all right. It's just going to be a bit boring for 4 minutes, but whatever. Can live with that. I'm in no rush. So I'm going to get the first thing you do. Obviously, the lens is still open at the minute, so I'm going to shut the lens. I'm going to be on the T thing. I'm going to check the shutter. Yeah, that's working. I've obviously got to time this myself on my watch. I'm going to put the film in. I'm going to make the exposure. Before I actually fire it off, I'm also going to check, because the cloud's blowing in a little bit, so I need to just check that while I'm setting up, nothing's changed. It hasn't got darker or lighter. So I've got the meter here ready for that. So the thing I've got to be aware is film's in, dark slide's in my hand. When I put the dark slide back in, I've got to put it in the correct way around to indicate to me that it's been exposed. Because I don't want to, when I go out tomorrow, next week, next shot today, I don't want to be picking the film holder that I've already used out and reshooting the same sheet of film, because that's going to be an expensive mistake. And I'm only going to shoot one here, so I've got no backup. I'm all in. Okay, so exposure's done. So all I've got to do now is take the film holder back out. I know it's exposed, so I'm not going to accidentally reshoot it. I've got my bag. I keep all the film holders in bags individually, which does a really good job of keeping dust off them. Sort of like whenever I load them, sort of hoover it out, hoover the bag out, hoover the film holder out, and I don't get much dust. Get a bit, you obviously get a bit, unavoidable, but it's really good, for like what they cost, nothing. So that's me done now. I'm going to take the camera, pack the camera down, and my hands are pretty cold, so I'm probably done, to be honest. Coming out and doing one shot, you know, that's fine. Okay, for once I've timed it right, because just as I've started putting the camera down, it started to rain again, which it seems to have been doing for the last week. So there we go, yeah. It's always interesting coming out in woodland like this, because it's like when you sort of think like, you know, you're going to stand at the top of a crag and it's a blazing sunset, so any idiot can take a good photo there. It takes a bit more effort here. It's like you come to a woodland and there's so much going on visually. It's such a chaotic sort of environment that it's quite hard to, quite a good disciplined practice to come to and try and distill some kind of order out of it that's going to work in a photo. It's like going into a pub and trying to listen to the music that's playing in the pub over all the chatter. It's sort of quite difficult until you know, if you can cut out all the noise, all the background noise, then you can hear the music. So this is what we're trying to do here. We're trying to come out and find some kind of order to allow, like, when you're looking at the image later, to make sense of it and sort of hear the beat, hear the music. So eventually what happens was the film, I would take that home and then I've developed it myself in the E6 chemistry I've got here. So what I've ended up with is that. Hold it in front of that white poster, you can sort of see. And then I've scanned it here on this separate old Mac which runs my scanner. And then it's into Capture One, same as any other, you know, same as any digital photos. So what I'm going to hopefully do here is show you a bit of what I'm doing on the screen. I might also put in a little, through the magic of video, just this looking on the light box now. Okay, so hopefully you got an idea there, but we'll have a look at the screen now. So this is one where there's actually not a lot to be done in post-production work on this, really. As you saw in the video, it's very, very flat lighting on this. It was quite a good match for the sort of contrast ratio that Velvia has. I mean, looking at it now, compositionally, I'm really happy with it. I think it sort of achieves quite a nice balance, all the different elements. So I'm pretty happy with that. Wasn't really surprised. I was fairly confident it was gonna be a good one. And also the other thing that I've checked, one of the first things I checked, something like this, I knew it was a very long exposure, which means there's a chance of wind movement, camera movement, that kind of thing, or even sometimes just the trees moving and swaying slightly. But as you'll see when we're going on the detail, there's no real sign of that. I think it's a good result for a day where it might not have bothered going out. A lot of people wouldn't have bothered going out. It doesn't seem very promising. Which is sort of why it's such a good film for those kind of conditions. Really soft light, dampness in the the mossy textures and the flat light. Because if you go into that with, say, if I shot this shot with like color negative film, for example, or black and white, by default it'll come out off the scanner looking pretty flat usually, and then you've got a bit of work to do. This is actually pretty easy. Another good thing about it, as you can see, there's not really any open pale tonal areas like skies, beaches, moving water, which is where you would tend to see dust from the scanner. So there isn't any of that, so there's not really much job to do in terms of like dust spotting it afterwards, which is great. So all I've done with this, really, bring up the side bit, let's just have a look at the before and after. There's not a lot that I've done there. I've given it a slight sort of increase in overall contrast and a very slight lift to the shadows. Slight, like I said, I haven't. The shadows haven't really lifted. It's more of a general sort of contrast overall slightly, particularly in the mid-tones. And as you can see here, that's my contrast. So what I have done, it'll show me that, if you see the red bits in the upper corners, what I've done is I've just detected that, to my eye, the upper corners were a little bit bright, and sometimes that can sort of lead the eye to sort of wander out of shot. So what I've done is I've, call it burning in, because it'll be burning on an enlarger, but same idea is just to bring the exposure down ever so slightly, and it's only like 2/3 of a stop or something on those corners. So if I just turn that off, you'll be able to see. And it's not much, like it's subtle. If somebody had said to me, right, we're going to scan that film and print it straight away, it would be fine. But just as a bit of a perfectionist thing, I've made those slightly darker, just to kind of keep the eye from wandering out, because there's a bit of a tendency for that due to the sort of distant pale bits there. But otherwise, and obviously it's slightly, you don't get the film borders on my scanner, so it's slightly cropped in, but not very much. Basically, you would recognise it, if you had this in your hand and that in your hand, it looks pretty true to the film. So all in all, I was really happy with that. And also, as you can see, if I just go in on this, the business of having the tilt just to align the plane of focus with the subject, if I go in on that and it brings it up at full res, you can see we've got tiny little droplets of water there, and it's in focus all the way through. So I was really happy with the the focus on this. The stuff in the very distance, like those fine branches right in the pale bit in the distance, they're out of focus, which is fine. I'm quite happy to let those go. I wasn't really intending to get those in focus. If I'd have wanted to get those in focus, probably means stopping down an extra stop or two, which I might not have even had that available on the lens. It might have made the exposure much longer. So it was quite a long one anyway. But overall, pretty happy with that. So happy, in fact, that it ended up being used on my calendar for this year. So it printed up really nicely. And actually, although this is mainly full of shots, I think this was probably one of the only sort of detail type shots in there. And most of them are sort of, grand landscape sort of thing. Is when I showed this to somebody, a family member who's not kind of a photographer specifically, but they picked this as one of the photos that jumped out of that, which is quite nice. That it's sort of there's a tendency when you do sort of detail shots in landscape that it ends up becoming this sort of you're preaching to the choir. It becomes like a photographer's thing to say, look how clever I am with this composition. But if it works for sort of more general audience, you're probably not doing much wrong there. So yeah, really happy with that. So yeah, that's it really. I'll wrap that up there. Thought it was just nice to show you the full cycle. And by the look of it, over the next week or so, we've got some more kind of dull, misty, sort of damp weather, classic British winter coming up. So probably get out there and be doing a bit more of this. Thanks for watching.